Blue Oyster Cult. You've heard it. I guarantee you've heard it. You just don't know it.
I just don't know the
Yeah.
So it's like a Scott.
Alrighty. So 2 days ago, Monday, we introduced you to the idea of they say, I say, and what that means in a general sense. Yesterday, we sunk our teeth into the specifics of introducing a they say and why that's important. It's important that you use arguments other than your own to help focus your writing, and your writing should be a consistent response to those arguments throughout your composition. Now, an essential element to that is the art of summary. This gets back to what we ended last week with, when I gave you that article and I had you identify the author's main points. That works in tandem with your ability to summarize, works in tandem with your ability to execute they say, I say templates. Those things together make great writing. Okay, so today is about summary and being more specific about what that means. Summarizing means presenting information from others that you present in your own words, including that which you paraphrase. I notice this a lot when I help out freshmen and sophomores with their English homework. If there's a question that they have to answer, they answer that question by copying down exactly word for word what the author says in response to that question. So, for example, let's say my question was something simple and story-based, like what does Atticus think about tacos? They would find the section in the book where Atticus is talking specifically about tacos, and they would copy that section down practically word for word, maybe changing a word here and there just so it kind of fits with the narrative of their sentence. That's a fine thing to do, but that only really demonstrates that you know where to find that information. That doesn't necessarily demonstrate at all that you understand the consequences of that information. Now the stakes are higher. We are asking you to summarize arguments. Arguments are complex. Arguments have nuance. And if you just copy down word for word where Mr. Cook makes his argument, you don't necessarily understand or reflect that you understand the nuance and the logic of that argument. And the only way to do that is to take what he's saying and put it into your own words. You will certainly borrow words that he uses. However, my statement of my summary of his argument should not be a 1-to-1 ratio. Does that make sense? So when I say, and I'm right there with you, because I used to get sick and tired of people saying, well, you got to summarize it in your own words. And I'd be like, what the heck? Who cares? This guy gets paid to write. I'm just going to use their words. However, again, here, you have to put it into your own to understand, to demonstrate you understand the logic of the argument. Now, as I help out some people as they're working on like their Christopher Columbus papers or document-based questions, a lot of you just want to use word for word the argument as it appears in a document. And that's not great, because you end up just kind of using that argument without understanding how to respond specifically to that argument, because you don't understand the specific argument that's being made. Take, for example, the Spanish were great guys because they were bringing religion to the natives, the savages. Now, a bad example would be, hey, Spanish people were good. They say Spanish people were great because they were bringing religion to the natives. I say they were killing people indiscriminately in the name of bringing religion to the natives. You with me so far? Why is that not a great example of a they say, I say that acknowledges a summary of the opposing argument?
Is it because there was never any mention of them killing them? You don't have proof.
No. Baked into the argument about why, Ms. Trunke? why did the Spanish, according to the Spaniards, why was it okay for them to kill natives in the name of converting them?
They were savages.
Because they weren't the same religion. They didn't want to convert.
And so it was their holy duty to convert them. So that is not a fair they say, I say, because I'm missing out on half of their argument. They say the Spanish killed people, or the Spanish were converting people, let me back up. They say that the Spanish brought religion to the natives in an effort to save them from eternal damnation. So according to the Spanish, it was okay if people died because they were living in sin. And if they died trying to be saved, they had a better chance of not spending the rest of their life in hell. That is the full representation of the Spanish argument for why or how they were bringing religion to the natives. Now, when I respond to that, I can't just say they killed people, right? Because, they said, we killed people because we were trying to save them. So my response to the Spanish argument would have to be something like what? Yeah, you were just using that as a cover for gold. Killing them doesn't necessarily save them, so it was still something that you were doing as a population control. But you have to acknowledge the fullness, be able to summarize in your own words the fullness of the other argument before you can move on to your own and respond to it. Does that make sense? This is why you need to be able to translate these complex, sophisticated thoughts into your own ideas, so you don't end up digging yourself into a hole that you can't get out of. The trick is going to be when you summarize that you must be true to what the author says while simultaneously emphasizing different aspects of what the author says that interests you. So this means that, this is kind of like everything in life is a pendulum to me. You can swing too far one way, you can swing too far the other way. You got to split the difference here. What this means is that, you don't necessarily need to represent every single point that they're making. You need to represent the points that they're making that relate to what you're going to respond to. So what I mean by that is, like, let's say that I want to make the case that to a Vikings fan. I want to make the case to a Vikings fan that the Packers are the better team because Aaron Rodgers is their quarterback. Now, when I'm responding to a Vikings fan's argument, would it make sense for me to make my point while summarizing my Viking fans' friend's argument about the Viking defense or the Viking special teams? If I want to make a point about Aaron Rodgers, why not, Mr. McGurran?
It's not how you are. Not afraid of what you're talking about.
Right. They bring up something about their defense. I bring up something about Aaron Rodgers. Those 2 points don't exist on the same track. If I'm going to bring up a point about Aaron Rodgers, what would be one of their points that I could be responding to? What? Their quarterback. It could be a comparison of quarterbacks. It could be even more interesting than that, too. Let's say a Viking fan says, hey, you know what? The Packers are worse than the Vikings because the Packers don't have a good offensive line. And if you don't have a good offensive line, you can't be a good football team. It's great. You say that. I say, well, Aaron Rodgers has never had a good offensive line. And he's been able to play injured and demonstrate that he's still able to play at a high level. So therefore, the Packers can still have a vibrant offense, even though their offensive line is bad. Do those 2 points exist on the same track? Right? Yes. Okay, so it's not just summarizing every single thing. You need to summarize things that are in the window of what you're trying to talk about. Easy summary mistakes. So you summarize the topic instead of the argument. This would be you are summarizing things too broadly. It's important that when you summarize somebody else's argument, you walk through the beats and the details of their argument. You try to summarize everything. We just talked about that. And then you make lists of what others say with no clear focus. This happens when you don't know what you want to say. So if you don't know what the point you want to make is, you're susceptible to just listing out every point that somebody else makes. It's a careful skill to demonstrate the intuition that's needed to understand what other point you need to summarize in order to make sense of your point. To write a great summary, you need to put yourself in their shoes. We're going to play the believing game probably tomorrow. We get done here at 50, right? Yeah. So we're probably going to play the believing game tomorrow. But what the believing game means is that when you're summarize something, it has to be presented as though you believe in what you're saying. So even though I may not believe Hansberger's argument about why the Vikings are better than the Packers, when I'm summarizing his argument, you should not be able to tell whether or not I agree or disagree. What's the problem with being able to tell? If you can tell I disagree with Hansberger when I'm summarizing Hansberger's argument.
You shouldn't sound condescending.
You're going to sound condescending? What'd you say?
It's opinionated.
It's opinionated, right? It's not a fair conversation of ideas. It is me just, here's what Hansberger believes, but that's stupid. Let me tell you the way it actually is. And that's not a sophisticated argument. That's a juvenile argument. That type of argument is great in middle school because it's an easy thing to be able to do and contextualize. But now as we start to become more sophisticated thinkers, you have to understand that he's bringing up some things that are true. Were the Spanish people trying to bring religion to the colonies? Yes, they were. Did they believe in what they were doing? Yes, they did. You can't dismiss that. But can they still be wrong?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So you have to go at it that way, as opposed to just saying, yeah, they did. They say they did that, but that was misguided. Readers should not be able to tell if you agree or disagree with what you're summarizing. Long story short. So what happens when you project bias? When you project bias onto something, you don't, this is the tricky part. When you project bias, when you summarize something in a biased way, you're doing that because you're trying to rip apart their argument, right? You're trying to make, I'm going to summarize this, but I'm going to make this seem like it's busted. However, when you do that, you don't bust their credibility. To a critical reader, you are busting up your own credibility. Okay, so consider this sentence that summarizes, don't blame the eater. This sentence has bias. In David Zinchenko's article, Don't Blame the Eater, is nothing more than an angry rant in which he accuses the fast food companies of an evil conspiracy to make people fat. I disagree because these companies have to make money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What specific phrase in here sets up that this is going to be a biased statement of their argument?
Nothing more than an angry rant.
So by including that in there, I'm already projecting my bias. Now, do they do a good job of accurately representing Zinchenko's argument?
Yes.
They do a good job. So you would say Zinchenko's argument is that fast food companies are part of an evil conspiracy to make people fat. Okay. Is Zinchenko making the argument that fast food companies are part of an evil conspiracy to make people fat? No, he's not saying that they're part of a conspiracy. He's saying that there are certain structural advantages that fast food companies have, and that might cause people to become obese. But Zinchenko's not saying evil conspiracy. Does that make sense? Could you still say companies still have to make money, accurately representing Zinchenko's argument? Yeah. What would you summarize? What is the argument you would want to summarize from Zinchenko if you wanted to make the point that fast food companies still have to make money?
They're convenient and cheaper, so they're more likely to use.
Yeah. It's not the fast food company's fault that it's convenient and cheap. So Zinchenko says fast food companies' convenience and cheapness lead to obesity. I say that those are features of fast food companies because a company's responsibility is to make money for the people who run the company. Now are both of those ideas on the same track? Yes. And have I objectively and accurately summarized Zinchenko's argument and still made my point? Yes, I have. Here's another problem. You quickly abandon your summary to rush and present your own response. So this would be like you're so excited to get to your I say that you forget to wrap a bow on the they say. The caveat for that is that when you're summarizing meta-analysis, have any of you heard of the phrase meta-analysis? Okay, I'm just going to skip it for now, then we'll come back to that later in the semester. The problem with quick summary is that you fall into cliche syndrome. So again, balance, you don't summarize everything, but if you summarize stuff too quickly, you don't reflect the nuance of the argument they're making. If you consider, and I'm sure at some point you've read Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. Tell me what the cliche is in this sentence. Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail goes from a passionate defense of civil disobedience to a plea for everyone to just get along. What's the cliche? For everyone to just get along. And if you read that letter recently, you would see that he's not asking for everyone to get along. It's something that's more nuanced and complicated than that. So accuracy is important. We talked about this a little bit earlier already. At the same time you fairly represent what someone else says, you must also exert a quiet influence with your response in mind. So again, you can't project bias, but you do want to talk about what they're talking about in the same terms of what you want to say. A good summary has a focus that allows the summary to fit with your own agenda while being true to the text that you're summarizing. Make sure your summary is an issue that matches your argument, otherwise you fall prey to list summaries. The example that we just went through an example of that about the Zinchenko argument. All right, so consider don't blame the eater, what you just read for today. What sort of arguments would you summarize from Zinchenko if you're trying to write an essay about the fast food industry in general? What sort of arguments would you summarize if you're trying to write an essay about parenting? What sort of arguments would you summarize if you're trying to write an essay about corporate regulation? What sort of arguments would you summarize for warning if you're trying to write an essay about warning labels? They would be different, right? You're not summarizing everything from Zinchenko if you're trying to write an essay about parenting. You're not summarizing everything if you're trying to write an essay about warning labels. What I want you to do at this big old table right here, I want you to come up with a summary of what's going on in Zinchenko's essay. Summarize an argument that relates to the fast food industry in general. Does that make sense? Back table over there. So the four of you, and plus Liv, summarize something that Zinchenko says that would be used in an essay about parenting. This sort of smorgasbord right here. So from Sint back to Kelsa and Eve plus the couch. Summarize something that could be used in an essay about corporate regulation. And then the back L, summarize something that could be used in an essay about warning labels. So you are just summarizing an argument that Zinchenko makes that could be used in an essay about one of these four things. You have 4 minutes to get something. You don't need to write it down. You just need to be able to verbalize it to the class. Ready, set, go. Morgan, you can go over here.
All right. Does it require transport? Like fast food. Okay, so like they have corporate regulation. It's like you have to provide. Oh yeah, every time I offer them, they go like fast food. It doesn't like go to the store and they'll be like, yeah.
Oh my gosh, I can give you a whole piece of facts on everything. No.
Fast food doesn't have.
I literally know. I bought all these packs for all my friends to share. I would have bought 2 packs. Yeah, I bought 8.
Oh,
Make me feel.
Yo, Maddie, I'll take some gum.
Oh, there goes restaurants and like
I'll take some gum. I will.
require restaurants to do in order to like provide them with the help and
Thank you.
Yeah.
They don't go out of their way.
I like it.
Options in there.
There are no calorie information cards on fast food packaging. The way they are on grocery.
Well, when's the fast food industry?
Well, that's more into warning
Include
labels.
corporate regulation and-
Yeah.
and warning labels.
Yeah, we're basically summarizing this.
Not required.
Or, corporate regulations require fast food restaurants to provide instructional.
I didn't know how to-
Calorie information cards. The same way.
And when they are, they're often inaccurate.
Or yeah, like basically salad dressing. Yeah, like it doesn't always add all the numbers somewhere. So you think it's like showing how much calories and nutritional value.
They want
it
it to be like
I wouldn't want that at all. So I don't even know.
they don't hide anything from anybody. They don't hide anything, like some people don't put the calories.
Yeah, but they're not regulated to, like some people.
How, like, we're regulated, so now this article is saying that you require that everybody should put calories in you know? Everyone should like, not, not hide behind
Getting the left.
Sometimes on
All right, one more minute.
calories on back of menu. One on the back.
What you were saying. Like, what you said. Like,
I always draw my picture, but I still listen when I do it.
I do. When they do draw for it. Numbers don't always add up, so people are really ignorant. And difficult
But without
It is.
children,
You're just gonna read it if you don't need it.
without
Jeez Louise.
I do advertise.
Parents from Charlie Brown. All right. Who wants to go first? Beautiful thing. You guys are doing parenting, right? So summarize an argument Zinchenko makes that would make sense in an essay about parenting.
When parents don't play a major role in life and are gone from home a lot, teenagers often resort to fast food chains because they are convenient and affordable.
Does that do a good job of accurately expressing an argument Zinchenko makes? Yes. Does that discuss an argument that would make sense about parenting? Yes. Good job. Who's next?
Sure.
Great. You guys are doing corporate regulation, right? Or warning labels. Okay.
Without warning labels, children will continue to be exposed to unhealthy foods. And
I'd say you haven't done a great job of expressing the fullness of the argument Zinchenko makes about warning labels. What is he saying about warning labels?
Because unhealthy foods like fast food poses a health risk.
Right. Okay. So it would just, your argument would need to be more full. Okay. All right.
it's
Um,
not supposed to be.
okay. All right.
We don't have anything.
All right. What do we have right up here?
That's what exactly.
You're doing corporate regulation, right? Okay.
Okay, fast food restaurants are not required to provide nutritional information like you would see in a grocery store. And when they do, it's often inaccurate and difficult for consumers to read, making it impossible to know if they made healthy choices.
But adding that, making it impossible to know if they made healthy choices is essential to having in there. So good job. You also could have stretched that out into, when people make unhealthy choices, they cause a public health issue. So inaccurate labeling could be causing a public health issue as well. And then the fast food industry in general.
So the words in general, would that make it include all the following parenting, corporation, regulation? And-
Well, I'm talking about the fast food industry.
Okay.
But
fast food industry is generally speaking more accessible to people than healthier options.
There you go. Good job, Mr. Cook. Good job, Cook. All right, get back to your original seat for a second. Make sure you have one of these half sheets of paper that I just handed out. Okay. Let's take a look at this right here. Okay. Suppose you want to argue that it's parents, not fast food companies, who are to blame for their children's obesity. Okay. You will want to highlight what the author says about the fast food industry and parents, not or. Okay. We're going to write this example. How does the first paragraph point to the original text? And I don't know why the second paragraph thing is on there. What is the general argument in supporting claims at the beginning of the summary? Does the author agree or disagree with Zinchenko? How does he set up his critique? This is an original Lindenberg. In his article, Don't Blame the Eater, David Zinchenko blames the fast food industry for fueling today's so-called obesity epidemic, not only by failing to provide adequate warning labels on high-calorie foods, but also by filling the nutritional void in children's lives left by their overtaxed working parents. With many parents working long hours, unable to supervise what their children eat, Zinchenko claims, children today are easily victimized by the low-cost, calorie-laden food that the fast food industry chains are still too eager to supply. When he was a young boy, for instance, Zinchenko and his single mother was away at work. He ate Taco Bell, McDonald's, and other chains on a regular basis and ended up overweight. Zinchenko's hope is that with the new spate of lawsuits against the food industry, other children with working parents will have healthier choices available to them, and they will not, like him, become obese. Okay, so does the first paragraph accurately summarize Zinchenko's argument?
Yeah.
Is it biased? No. Okay. It's stated, and is the first paragraph focused on all of Zinchenko's arguments he's making?
No.
What is it focused on? The parenting part. Even when I bring up the fast food convenience, I do that while also talking about how that affects parenting. So this whole first paragraph is an argument Zinchenko makes as it relates to parenting. In my view, however, it is the parents and not the food chains who are responsible for their children's obesity. While it is true that today's parents work long hours, there are still several things that parents can do to guarantee that their children eat healthy foods. So here, now I'm pivoting to an I say. Now, quiz time. Could I say right there that parents could order parents could order food from a meal service that would deliver healthy meals to their doorstep? Is that a fair or unfair argument for me to make based on what I summarized about Zinchenko? Why is it unfair?
Because those can be pricey, and if the parents are at home, it can be hard for the kids to make it.
Very good. So is that true? Could parents do that stuff?
No.
Yes, that is true, but that is not a fair or accurate thing to say based on the argument I'm responding to.
They can refute it with what she's.
Exactly. What would be something that I could put in here?
Fresh produce.
Yeah. I would have to come up with something that is convenient because parents are not there and cost effective because these parents don't have money. So what would be convenient and cost effective? Mac and cheese is not healthy.
PB&J.
PB&J. Is that anybody eat quinoa?
Yes.
Yeah, I love it too. It is cheap. It is full of nutrients. It is easy to make. That's what I would have to put in here. So do we understand that difference between, or do we understand the connection between the argument you summarize and how that influences how you respond? Okay. I'm just going to leave you there for today. You can spend these last 3 minutes thinking about your life choices. I will ask Liv for her quinoa recipes, and then see you tomorrow.
Was your first idea of a career like professional chef?
No, I hated food.